Hey there everyone, welcome to this episode of TJ's Reef. Today we're going to be talking about temperature and how you keep your reef tank at the temperature you choose. Stay tuned. Hey there everyone, welcome to another edition of TJ's Reef. Let me start off by apologizing if it looks like or sounds like I'm talking a little bit funny. It's because I had some dental work done today, but I couldn't stop. I needed to get some more videos recorded, so here we are in front of the tank, and today we are going to talk about temperature. Over the course of TJ's Reef, we've talked about a number of important tank factors, and temperature is definitely one of them. What temperature should your tank be at? Well, there's a lot of debate, and some people will say warmer, some people will say cooler, and a lot will say, well, it depends on what you're keeping. The safest, most general number that I can tell you for most tanks would be about 78 degrees. 78 is a pretty good, spot for most tanks. I try to keep mine right around 78 degrees, and you'll see a lot of people in the reefing community keep their tanks in that 70 to 80 degree range. You don't see people go much above that. And you don't see too many people really go below that unless you're keeping something very specific that needs cooler or warmer waters. But 78 for most reef tanks or mixed reef tanks is what you want to target. Okay, so now you know 78 degrees is what you want to shoot for. How do you get to it? How do you maintain it? Well, we'll talk about that after you do what? Subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Now let's get back to the information. So how do you maintain your temperature? Well, if your water is too cold, obviously we need to warm it up. And across the aquarium industry, people generally use heaters. Heaters are readily available. You can go to just about any pet store or any fish store and get a heater. Now, I strongly suggest you don't get a cheap heater. Cheap heaters can fail. I've had heaters in my tanks fail. Thankfully, they failed where they shut off, which is a lot better than when they fail to turn off when they hit their target temperature and they fail on. And when a heater fails in the on position, you pretty much cook everything in your tank in no time. So spend a little bit of money, get a nicer aquarium heater for your tank. Now, a lot of them can be controlled with a built-in thermostat. Still, you may want additional protections and control over your heater. So I have both. I have a thermostat controlled heater in my tank, and I also have a electronic heater controller underneath the tank, and we'll take a look at that right now. So this controls my heater. I set what I want my temperature to be, it keeps it within a range, and it will turn it on and off. The nice thing about having this type of setup is that if one fails, you still have the other as a backup. So let's say the heater thermostat got stuck in the on position, well, the heater controller under the tank would shut it off when the tank got to the right temperature. So it gives you a little bit of extra protection. Now, adding heat to the tank generally isn't an issue for most reefers. Yeah, we do have heaters and they will kick on a little bit here and there. I've generally not had an issue with needing heat in a tank. What a lot of reefers have though is needing to cool a tank down. We've all heard me say, I live in Arizona and it's warm here. Yeah, it's real warm here. And in the summer, it gets really warm in the house. I keep it at 72 for the most part, but when the air is turned off, it can go up as high as 80 degrees because electricity is expensive out here. So how do we keep our tanks cool? Well, if you have a larger tank, you're probably going to need a chiller. And a chiller is like an air conditioner for your tank. Instead of coils having air blown past them that are cooling the air down, you have coils that have water running over them and then being sent back into your tank. It's really simple. It's an air conditioner, but instead of air, your tank water is being sent over the chiller. Why do you need a chiller? Why do you need any type of cooling? Generally, it's because of lights. Lights are probably the #1 heat contributor to our tanks. Next to that are probably all the pumps we put in them. So if you have a larger tank, you have a large return pump, and you have a large pump on your skimmer, and you might have another pump on a UV sterilizer. UV sterilizer can add heat as well. All these things add up, which tends to heat up our tank. So a chiller is kind of the ultimate temperature controller as far as keeping a tank cooler. So if it's getting too hot, the chiller will cool it down. Chiller works just like a heater in reverse. It's got a thermostat, and I know on one of my previous tanks I actually ran heaters and chillers, which kept it rock solid. I was running metal halides, and so the tank water would get really hot. Now, if you don't quite need a chiller, and maybe you have a smaller tank like me, what are some other options to keep the temperature cooler? Well, the first and easiest thing you can try, especially with a tank like this, is mount a fan over it. Blowing a fan across the surface of the water will cause evaporation, which should help cool it down. Now understand that if you're going to cause more evaporation, make sure you have an ATO and one that can keep up with the evaporation rate, and make sure you keep your ATO reservoir all the way full. Now if the fan doesn't work, here's kind of a hack I learned about years ago, and I don't know if anyone's still doing it, but it can be a good temporary fix. Maybe some people out there still use it, I don't know. But what I learned is if you have a sump and you don't have the money for a chiller, what you can take is frozen 2-liter bottles of water. So get yourself a soda bottle or something similar, fill it with water, stick it in the freezer, and then put that frozen bottle, not the water, the frozen bottle with the water sealed inside, and float it in your refugium or your sump or wherever, and the water will cool off as it flows past it. Now you gotta kind of have to be careful with this, because depending on your tank size, you put a 2-liter ice cube in your tank that could chill it too much. So maybe you have frozen water bottles instead of a large 2-liter. But it is an option, something you can try. Don't put ice directly in your tank, because obviously that will melt and dilute your salt water. We don't want that, now do we? So what else can you do to try to reduce the amount of heat coming from your lights in your tank? Well, you can raise them. If you're not running them at full power, you might be able to raise them a couple more inches from the tank, and then just increase the power to get back any power that you lost in raising them. Getting them away from the surface of the water can help, and create a little bit more space to allow cooler air, and does not overheat that tank, because these guys don't like it when it gets too hot. Now, I'm sure somebody out there is going to tell me, oh, but what about tide pools? A tide pool can get over 100 degrees, and the corals and the invertebrates and the fish and everything trapped in a tide pool are just fine, and they don't have any problem. Cool. This ain't a tide pool. I'm not here to argue about letting your temperatures go crazy. I just know that we try to keep things as stable as possible, and temperature should be one of them. That is going to do it for this episode of TJ's Reef. I hope you learned a little bit about temperature. Make sure to shoot for about that 78 degrees, and you should be just fine with just about anything you want to keep in your tank. Remember, generally it's not that they get too cold, it's that they get too hot. And so some options to take away some of that heat are chillers, fans, moving your lights, maybe frozen bottles of water as a temporary fix. They also have, I forgot to mention, they also have Pico style chillers, which can use on small tanks. They're kind of a rod that goes in there, and you can look them up online. I'm not a scientist, but I know it cools the rod that sits in the water, and the water moves past it and it cools it off. So kind of like a mini chiller. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode of TJ's Reef. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, I apologize if it looks like or sounds like I'm talking funny, but we managed to make it through. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll be seeing you on the next episode of TJ's Reef. Boom.